One more thing I wanted to mention just before we shoot through paper is the importance of the arrow in the overall tuning of the bow. So we're doing everything to get the rest in alignment with the riser, with the string, to make sure everything's just pushing that arrow perfectly straight forward as it comes off of the bow. But the arrow is a vital part of that as well. So it's important to make sure you've got an arrow that is spined correctly. That's the amount of flex that you're getting out of that arrow. So when the bow comes, or when the arrow comes off of the bow, it's actually going to flex slightly. And if it flexes too much, it's going to porpoise as it flies. If it doesn't flex enough, it's going to kick as it comes in, either kick down or kick up, depending on where the rest is, too much. So a perfectly spined arrow is going to be vital to making sure that the bow shoots properly, that everything is tuned properly, because ultimately it's the arrow that you want to have perfect flight. And setting up the bow is just part of that. Another part of the arrow that's important is the FOC. And there's a lot of debate about how much FOC, and FOC is just front of center where the arrow balances. So if it's 15%, say the center of the arrow's here and the balance point is there, then we are, say, 2 inches, and that translates into an equation that says we have 15% FOC, which is typically about where I try to get. I am shooting a 300 spine arrow, so it's a little heavier than a 350. According to the arrow chart, I'm right on the balance between 300 and 350 spined arrows, so I go with the stiffer arrow. And this arrow should shoot pretty well out of this bow. I've had good luck for several years now shooting the BlackEagle Spartan arrows in the 300 spine and with about 15% FOC. So I'm shooting a 100 grain field tip or 100 grain broadhead. And I also have I think it's a 40 grain tip weight, or a weight there that goes in the insert to add weight up front, which increases my FOC. The problem is if you have your balance back at the center point and you have no FOC, it's not going to have that front weight pulling the arrow through the air as it releases, and that energy in the front. So one thing to make sure is if you're having trouble getting your bow tuned, maybe try a different spine arrow and just shoot it and see if you get the exact same bullet hole or the exact same hole through paper, or if maybe you get a little better or a little worse hole. But spine of the arrow, FOC are two important things. My arrow weighs, should be about 457 grains. I'll just weigh it real quick so I can give you a reference. And it is 458.3. There we go. So shooting right around that 458 grain mark. Just want to weigh this one again. Yeah, 458.3. They're both the same. All right, so 458 grains, FOC is about 15%, 300 spine arrow, and we'll shoot it through paper now that we have the rest set on the prime Logic CT5. All right, so we've got everything set up and ready to shoot through paper, and that'll allow us to really fine tune the rest location, make sure that arrow's coming off of the bow just as flat and as smoothly as it can. I like to get back 6 to 8 feet from the paper. That gives the arrow time to stabilize a little bit. Once I get a bullet hole here at 6 or 8 feet, I'll move back to 15 or 20 feet and shoot another arrow through there just to make sure that there's not something funny going on and I just happen to get lucky and get at that point where the arrow passes through the paper perfect. But we'll go ahead and just shoot an arrow, see where we're at. Left to right, we should be fairly close. We're lined up right on the center of the riser, so that should be good. But up and down, I think, is the one that we might need to adjust. Just looking at it right there, the arrow, the center of the arrow is about centered with the burger hole on the riser. I prefer to be knock up just a little, just a slight knock high, like a 1/16 of an inch or so. So I'm guessing we may end up needing to move the rest down just a touch, but we'll shoot it and see where we're at. All right, so we've got a pretty drastic tear knockdown. So the endpoint, or the impact point of the arrow's up here, and then the impact point of the knock is down here. So that arrow's coming out and going through like that. So the nock's dropping as the arrow goes through the paper and it's tearing down. All right, so we're going to adjust the rest down just a little bit. And that should bring that tear to close to a bullet hole. Try it right there. So we've got probably a 3/8 to a 1/2 inch tear down. I moved us down probably about a 1/16 of an inch on the rest. And we'll see if that gets us in the ballpark. So we are definitely close. That's a really good hole. But I think we can come down just a touch more. So I'm going to drop that rest just a sliver more. Very slight. So we have a tear that would be considered knocked down. And we want to move the rest down. Or we could move the knocking point, the D loop, we could move it up. I've already got mine tied in. So I'm moving the rest down slightly. One thing to keep in mind is as we're moving this rest down, it's decreasing the distance from where we have our rest string tied into the cable to the contact point. So we might have to tighten that up a little bit. Our rest, we'll just watch it as we draw back and see, but we might not be coming quite up to vertical, or we might be getting vertical but have no string travel beyond that. So we'll take a look at that and make sure. But just keep in mind as you adjust the rest up and down, it's going to change the pressure that you're putting on that rest as that cable moves up and down. One of the things I like to do when I'm paper tuning is I'll just get a Sharpie and I'll mark the number of shot that corresponds to each hole. That way if I get 5 or 6 shots into it, I can see the progression, see what I have actually accomplished through moving the rest, and make sure I'm going in the right direction there. So I'm just going to put a 1 next to the first hole and a 2 next to that second hole that actually looks really good. So I'm going to shoot arrow number 3 here and see if I can tighten that hole up just slightly. And if there's anything, if it goes worse in the wrong direction, I'm just going to go right back to where that rest was. I just moved it slightly down, see if I can bring that impact just more slightly in line with the knock. And you'll see it's not as bad as it looks. We've got the impact there. I think I like that previous hole better though. I'm going to shoot one more arrow before I move it. That hole is really good, but we are getting a slight left tear that we didn't have here. They're both really good looking holes, but I know this one is probably going to shoot a broadhead better than this one. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to raise that rest just that slight sliver that I lowered it. Right about there should do it. So I brought us back to where we were for shot number 2. Shot number 3 is pretty much identical there. I'm not going to get greedy yet. I was going to move just slightly to compensate for, there's just a slight left tear, but it's so incredibly slight. I don't think I'm going to worry about it yet. If we notice anything in the way the broadheads are flying when we shoot broadheads, I'll make that adjustment then. But I think for what we've got right here, we have it fairly well dialed. And I'm going to shoot one more shot just to make sure that I got back to where I wanted to be when I moved the rest there. And then we'll be able to go and put a broadhead on and shoot our broadhead versus our field point at 20 yards and make sure it's dialed in to shoot broadheads. And then we're ready to sight in the sight and start shooting field points for the next several months leading up to elk season. All right, so I'm just going to shoot one more arrow here, make sure that I got the rest moved back to where it was. And that looks pretty good. You can see our impact point. You can see all of the veins are lined up really well centered on there. And I think that's, I'll call that a bullet hole. I think I'm gonna end up having to move the rest just slightly to bring that knock point just, I'm talking a 1/16 of an inch. But that 1/16 of an inch it really makes a huge difference when we start shooting broadheads. And being able to dial that right in, making sure that our knock and our impact point of the arrow are dialed perfect through that paper will translate to broadheads and field points shooting really well. But the ultimate test is just put a broadhead on, shoot it, put a field point on, shoot it, and make sure they're both hitting at the same impact point at 20 yards. I'll go out and probably shoot 40 yards again after that to make sure, but if I can get 20 yards good, for the most part, from there all the way out to as far as I want to shoot, broadheads and field points are going to fly the same. That just tells me my arrow is tuned, my bow is tuned, the rest is in the right location, everything's working together as it should, and I'm going to have confidence in my bow in the elk woods this September. So stay tuned for the next video. We're going to show you how to tune a broadhead and make sure that the broadheads are flying with the field points and that everything's dialed in and ready to hunt.